Dungeons are a staple in classic WoW. Some of my fondest memories, and probably even yours, are spending my youth discovering and exploring a dungeon for the first time, and later returning at 60 just to decimate all the mobs inside. While this video will primarily be my opinion on how I feel about the aesthetic and flow of a dungeon, I'm also including factors such as the raw gold or materials you can earn, as well as the experience gained at the appropriate levels. My list may vary from your opinion, so feel free to tell me what you would change or what your favorite dungeon is. Before I jump into things, I do a giveaway in every single one of my videos, so feel free to scroll down and try to guess or answer the question I've posted and you can win a free month of WoW. Last week's winner was Zap, who guessed the name of the very first server I played on, so congrats to you. Before I can get into the top 5, I have a few honorable mentions, starting with Wailing Caverns. This place was a staple for collecting twink gear, yielding an incredible amount of experience, and actually had a fairly interesting story, as well as challenging bosses. I still have vivid memories of my first time in the Wailing Caverns, but it just couldn't make it onto the list because it's such a long dungeon compared to the others in this level range. Nowadays, every time I find myself going through a run, about an hour in I start wondering how soon until we'll be done. Past this though, once Battlegrounds become available, this place is an excellent spot to make gold, especially as a skinner collecting perfect deviate scales, or even selling dungeon runs. But alas, that's just not quite enough to get it a seat in the top 5. Also in our honorable mentions category is Sunken Temple. While the lore is interesting, it's nothing incredibly special. What garnered Sunken Temple some points is the fact that it's one of the only dungeons with quite a few puzzles in it, such as the Snake Statue Order, summoning Hakar, and figuring out how to summon the final boss. To this day, ages later, people still don't understand how to do large portions of the dungeon. I always found this a very fun aspect, but I know plenty of people that despised how much extra work you have to do to get from boss to boss, or to complete certain quests here. While this dungeon posed some challenges, there were plenty of great rewards here, and quite a few best in slot items for many classes. But it came at quite a length, and the fact that most parties disbanded before I could ever fully complete the dungeon loses Sunken Temple's seat in the top 5. Our final honorable mention is Zul'Farrak. I can't think of a single negative thing to say about the capital of the Sandfury Trolls. While the lore is slightly lacking, the aesthetic is amazing here, and you can get the best in slot carrot on a stick here. In addition to that, you can create Soul Thraex, which was the first epic I ever equipped. Too bad it was on my hunter back in the day. I can't tell you how many times I've done the pyramid event, and I'll never get sick of it. Zul'Farrak was probably one of my most ran dungeons in vanilla, and it's pretty obvious why. To top all of this off, Zul'Farrak is an amazing place to farm gold. Plenty of people run it just to collect gold, but the experience is also fantastic. We're at the 2-month mark after launch, and people are still farming this place for experience. Honestly, if this was a top 6, Zul'Farrak would have a spot. Actually, you know what? This is a top 6 now. Because Classic has made me remember how well designed and unforgettable every portion of this dungeon was. From the Scarab Room, the pool you summon Gazrilla from, the pyramid event, and even the little alcoves that a party member would always aggro mobs from. This place was fantastic. And that's why I've just decided to promote it from honorable mention to the previously non-existent number 6 slot. Shadowfang Keep holds our number 5 slot. It's easy to see why Shadowfang Keep is one of the best dungeons in Classic. The length of the dungeon is just right. Not once have I felt like a run in the Worg-infested keep drug on too long. Plus, there's a nice shortcut that gets you out of the dungeon quickly. Coupled with a pretty high mob density, this place is fantastic for power leveling. And on the topic of fantastic, this place has an incredible potential for gold. There are quite a few BOEs here that are some of the best items a twink can have for the level range. Even if you aren't lucky enough to get the Shadowfang, this place is loaded with cloth, which can net you some decent income, or just help you level your professions. Lore-wise, we're entering the former home of Baron Silverlane, which has now unfortunately been infested by Worgen and their master Argal, who brought the Worgen into Silverpine, but saw that they couldn't be controlled after they drove the Scourge off from the lands. Argal brought them into the keep and locked them there, succumbing to the fact that they needed to be contained and that they would only follow him. Like I noted earlier, Shadowfang Keep is a pretty quick dungeon. As such, you'll earn around 32,000 experience per hour if you're being ran, but we can reduce that number to 20,000 per hour if you're going through as a group. Overall, this place is pretty awesome, and my first trip spending over 2 hours running to Silverpine on a dwarf to run this dungeon will forever remain in my memory. At number 4, we have the Deadmines.
You there! Check out that noise!
and
None may challenge the Brotherhood.
have been permanently engraved into my mind. And that's coming from someone who has almost exclusively played Horde for the majority of their WoW career. The amazing lore, the aesthetic, the dungeon layout, what's not to love about this place? I remember the first time seeing this massive warship hidden away back in 2005, and feeling like I was doing something incredibly important in the Warcraft universe, like saving Stormwind. Then, we jump into the story and find out that the Defias were former Masons who rebuilt Stormwind after the Horde razed the city, but never received payment from the nobles of Stormwind. Their lore is a tale of tragedy, and you almost feel bad returning Edwin Van Cleef's head at the end of the questline, because if Stormwind's noblemen and women weren't corrupt, then these craftsmen could have carried on with their lives. If lore isn't your thing, and you're more concerned about the items you can receive, then there's plenty here for you. Some items here you'll carry for 10 or more levels. To top that off, this place is a treasure trove for level 19 twinks. Plus, the Blackened Defia set looked pretty badass, considering most things make you look like a clown in your early 20s. Getting ran through the dungeon will net you an average of about 18,000 experience per hour, and you'll get a good amount of cloth and engineering items. As a group, I was able to average about 16,000 experience per hour. While the gold gain potential isn't as great as that of Shadowfang Keep, everything else about the Deadmines nets it a spot at number 4. The Scarlet Monastery. What more do I need to say? Coupled together, the 4 wings of the monastery cover over 10 levels, and drop some of the most memorable looking pieces of loot in the game. From the graveyards to the cathedral, every boss has something memorable. Everyone has died at least once to Arcanist Doan's explosion, or even Herod's Blade Storm. Unfortunately, you won't leave the monastery with pockets full of change or the most experience per run, but all 4 wings boast the advantage of being fairly quick to complete, even with a weak group. The Crusade has incredible lore that spans across multiple zones and takes many turns. I'm not gonna spoil it for those of you that haven't explored the dungeon and its lore to its fullest, but let's just say that the Crusade's greatest enemy has much more control over it than they truly understand. So, what made me have the Scarlet Monastery over Deadmines and Shadowfang Keep? Factors like me rolling characters based on if they could equip Herod's items or not. The fact that it was a nice break from being ganked every 3 minutes in Stranglethorn Vale. And lastly, the nostalgia I get when entering. The Hobbs wave pulling was one of the first memories I have of watching and getting involved in YouTube. Under normal circumstances, I would put this lore on the list, but due to personal bias, Scarlet Monastery gets the number 3 slot. Scholomance is a vile academy for the Scourge's next wave of necromancers. Once wealthy nobles, the Baroth family pledged their keep and themselves to Kel'Thuzad, now eternally keeping watch over their halls as the undead horrors they've become. Deep within the crypts of the school, we find a laboratory with the Lich, Raz Frostwhisper, a man who had the courage to stand before the Lich King, but slit his own throat to prove that he was there to serve rather than to fight, and was subsequently awarded by the Lich King. If the lore isn't enough to draw you in, the challenging bosses, large amount of best-in-slot items, amazing aesthetic and coloration, and considering Halloween is around the corner, I have to give it some bonus points for that as well, then I don't know what is. We won't be taking experience into account here as things vary greatly at the endgame, and most people running this dungeon will already be maxed out. And while there is great potential for gold here, you're probably going to end up splitting it with 4 other people. But this will still top any gold that you'd gain from the previous dungeons. All of these factors contribute to what makes Scholomance a fantastic place and why it earns my number 2 spot. At number 1, as you probably guessed, we have Blackrock Depths. No other dungeon in the history of MMOs has come close to the story and atmosphere this ancient dwarven city provides. To me, Blackrock Depths is the closest I can get to experiencing a Tolkien-esque dwarven city from the Warhammer universe. It gets the itch that Ironforge's arms just couldn't reach. There's so much that I can say about the depths that covering everything could take me ages. What other dungeon requires you to mind control a mob to learn a recipe, or even houses the entrance to a raid? Even if we don't consider those aspects, every boss has some kind of quirky lore, such as Argomok having hundreds of clones of himself, or even the daughter of Magni Bronzebeard developing Stockholm Syndrome for Emperor Thaurissan. Boasting 26 different bosses, a bar, and some interesting puzzles, every run of Blackrock Depths is different from the next. You'll find yourself in here from 48 to 60, A level span larger than any other dungeon, with a whopping 40 quests when most dungeons usually just have about 5. So many portions of Blackrock Depths reward players who have careful observational and puzzle solving skills, and while you'll spend hours and hours getting through the dungeon, consequent runs were made quicker and easier with keys you were rewarded for your progress, allowing you to unlock shortcuts. Blackrock Depths has been a dungeon that many have entered but few have mastered. This dungeon is a marvel of ingenious game design, and if that isn't enough to put it in your number 1 slot, then the potential for money, experience gain, and even the bonds you probably created running this dungeon should. I've made many friends and have spent so much enjoyable and productive time in this dungeon that it rightfully holds the number 1 spot on this list by a long shot, and hopefully on yours as well. Otherwise, that's it. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a fantastic day, and thank you to my very first Patreon, Nibs.